Hi guys, David here from Living in SA TV. My wife and I are starting a new project called Working in SA TV. The reason for this project is that she gets a lot of questions about human resources situations in South Africa. And we decided to start this project in order to educate and create awareness amongst the larger South African population on this important topic. My wife has a bachelor's of social sciences in organizational psychology and an honors degree in employee relations and organizational psychology and a master's of arts in employee relations and human resources. Coupled with this, she has worked in large multinationals for more than 15 years and has extensive experience in this regard. Please note that this channel is only applicable for South African workers and employees. Okay, hi Shireen. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, David. And again, thank you for the introduction. This platform will be used to educate workers and employers of the rights and obligations in the place of work in South Africa. I hope that the viewers will enjoy the channel and we will welcome any questions or feedback on what the viewers would like to see in future podcasts. So feel free to put your questions or anything you would like answered on the comment section below.
Okay, very well. Thanks, Shireen. Look, the main purpose of our platform is basically, telling people their rights in terms of the workplace, because I know many people sometimes they get, fired and they don't know how to protect themselves, so it's a lot of injustice out there. So we also here to help you guys to understand what you guys can do if you go through something like this. Okay, with any more delays, first question, how can you get terminated from your job in SA?
Okay, so David, this is a very good question. Essentially, there are three reasons that your services can be terminated from employment. The first reason is for misconduct. The definition or the overview of misconduct is basically unacceptable or improper behavior by a worker. Okay. Your second way you can be terminated is through incapacity, for sickness or poor performance. And this is basically called a no-fault dismissal, meaning that it's a dismissal that is not the fault of the employee. This is something that I will discuss in more detail in future podcasts. Operational requirements is, for example, when the employer's business is restructuring and your role is no longer required.
Right, thank you very much, Shireen. So the second question is, can you tell the viewers what will happen if you are guilty of misconduct?
Okay, so I must explain the different types of misconduct. You can have serious misconduct, which is where you commit a serious offense, for example, like stealing, being insubordinate to your manager. Basically, insubordination is where you are very rude to your manager in layman's terms, where you fight on company premises, or you hit someone at work, or where you willfully, meaning with intention, damage company property. So you can have willful misconduct or non-willful misconduct. So basically the difference between the two is with intent. Okay. For these serious offenses, you can be dismissed summarily. So I'm going to explain to you what summary dismissal is later in the podcast. For other non-serious misconduct like absence without leave for a short period of time or coming late to work for the first offense, the company cannot normally terminate your services unless it's in their disciplinary code of conduct to do so.
Actually, very interesting listening to you now that you're putting these things into perspective. So the third question is, so if the company cannot dismiss you as the misconduct is not serious, what can they do?
Okay, so they can basically give you a counseling or a written warning for the first offense and a second or final written warning for repeat offenses. Repeat offenses means an offense for the same incident that is now being repeated. And therefore, after you get a counseling or a warning, you can then go on to either a second written warning or a final written warning. The company needs to give you warnings for non-serious misconduct before they can terminate you. Again, it will depend on the company code of conduct. If in the company code of conduct you can be dismissed for the first offense, for a transgression, then that's something that the company has got in place. So I would advise you to understand and know what the company disciplinary code of conduct is. However, again, many companies should not be wanting to dismiss for non-serious misconduct issues on a first occasion. They have to try to help you, counsel you, give you warnings, and try to get your conduct to improve.
Okay, Shireen, so you mentioned the disciplinary code of conduct. What is this?
Okay. The disciplinary code of conduct is a set of rules that the employer has set out, together what action will be taken for the different transgressions or actions that the employee does wrong. So I'm going to give you a practical example of what a disciplinary code of conduct should look like. You could have in the disciplinary code of conduct, your transgression would be failing to notify your manager that you intend to be late from work. Your action for the first offense should be first offense counseling. And then normally your employer should also advise you how long the warning would be valid for. So in many companies, the counseling would normally be valid for 3 months. However, this can differ according to different companies. Another example would be, say, you are then again late without notifying your employee. The second transgression would be a written warning, and that would be valid for then, as an example, 6 months. So what I'm trying to say is here, the offense has to be a repeated offense of the same nature for the discipline to be progressive, meaning to move from a counseling to a written warning to a final written warning. Okay? In the case of an employer should have always a disciplinary code of conduct, because if the case goes to the CCMA commissioner is going to ask what is stated in your disciplinary code of conduct. So this document is an important set of rules to follow, both for the employee as well as the employer in an organization.
Okay, this is quite interesting for some of you who are listening to this. So, Shireen, what happens if the employee has committed a serious offense?
If the employee has committed a serious offense, like for example theft, gross misconduct, and one of the other examples I mentioned above earlier in the podcast, the employee can be called to a disciplinary inquiry. Okay, so there's two things here. The employee can be called to a disciplinary inquiry as a first off. If they've committed a serious offense, they don't need to have repeated warnings on file. So for example, if you've stolen, you don't need to get counseled. You don't need to get a written warning. You don't need to get a final written warning. If you've stolen, you can immediately go to a disciplinary inquiry and be dismissed. Okay? Because it's serious. No one wants anybody to be stealing in the workplace. But you can also go to a disciplinary inquiry if you have repeated offences on file. So if you have a counselling, a written warning, a final written warning for late coming, you can also go to a disciplinary inquiry, because now you can be dismissed because you've already been through three series of repeated offences. So when the employee calls the employee to a disciplinary inquiry, the employer needs to abide by certain legal requirements.
Really interesting, Shireen. Thanks for that. So, okay, so this brings us to the end of this podcast. Please, can you advise what will happen next?
Thanks, David. So in part 2 of this podcast, I will deal with what happens during the disciplinary inquiry process.